Hey guys, it's Rachel with Restorations by Rachel, and I have this beautiful buffet that I will be working on. It's made by Drexel. It on camera, just with this shot, it looks like it's in a lot better shape than it really is, but the old finish is doing that kind of alligatoring, I don't know the technical term, but where it gets really scaly looking. There's some damage on the top, but I'm hoping my plan for this is to do just like a gentle restoration on it because there's no way I'm stripping all this. Just I have stripped and sanded mahogany before and it's a big pain. And then also like this is different wood than the rest. And just toning all that is and getting it sanded and all that is quite a bit of effort for the return. So I'm going to start with hopefully keeping this stain. And since there are some dents on the top, those will remain. They'll just be part of it. But since I'm going to hopefully spend less time on it, that's okay. Even if I'm selling it for a little bit less, I'm still hopefully going to get a good return on my time. So let's get going. Get started. I'm going to give it a good clean. But before that, I am going to take all the hardware off so I can get cleaned around there. And plus, I'm going to polish these up to make them look a little bit brighter. And then I'll just store this in a bag for safekeeping. Always when I take out the hardware, I like to put in a long screw from the back end and then secure it with some painter's tape. This way I can still open and close the drawer as I need to. This buffet was pretty dirty after hanging out in my garage for several months, so I'm giving it a good vacuum inside and out, and then also cleaning it with some Dawn dish soap and water. Now, if I had known that I would actually end up stripping this, I wouldn't go through all this process of cleaning it before stripping. It's just not necessary. But since I was first planning to try just doing a light sand with gel stain, I knew it needed to be cleaned. With there being so much problems with the top coat, I knew that there was a chance that this would not work out, but I still started out with the 180 grit. What you would do if you were going with this process is to get everything a good scuff sand. That way your gel stain has a good surface to adhere to. Then I vacuumed and wiped back all the dust to see how it was looking. Okay, y'all, I think I'm going to pivot here. Just because even with that light sanding, I just feel like the finish is crackling so bad and failing in a lot of places, because even when I wiped it down originally, it would get pretty milky, which isn't too uncommon with, you know, putting water on a surface, but it just doesn't, it seems like it's kind of reached its maximum usage. So I don't want to put anything on top of something that's failing. So I think I'm going to pivot. So remember how I said I was not going to fully strip this down? Eating at my words, y'all. So I'm starting with an 80 grit sandpaper on the top just because there is a lot of those deeper scratches, and I'm going to have to try my best to get rid of those with sanding. This is how it looked when I was finished with the 80 grit. You'll see at the edges that I didn't sand off as much. Those are the areas that it's much easier to burn through the veneer. So now I'm going to switch to the 120 and give it a good sand. At this grit, I'm basically getting rid of all the finish that's still on there, and then I'm going to come back and hand sand on the edges with the 120. So sanding the top wasn't that bad. So I am going to see how sanding the drawers goes rather than going through the stripping process. Like I said earlier that I hated, and I was like, no way I'm doing this down the raw wood, but you know, famous last words. So I'm going to start out with my orbital, and I have the foam abrasive attachment interface pad is what it's called. So I have I'm going to start with 120. I started with 80 on the top, but just with the drawers, I'm going to see how the 120 goes at first. And if it's not working well enough, then I'll move up to the 80, but I need to be really careful. And I'm going to start with this speed a little bit slower too. Since the finish was failing, sanding worked really well. I was able to sand through the old finish rather quickly. I did end up burning through the veneer on some edges on some of these drawers, so I'll have to fix that later, but you know, I tried to be careful, but it just didn't happen for whatever reason. And then here on the sides, you can see it's coming off rather easy. I even had this trim piece that was kind of loose, so I just went ahead and pulled that off so it wouldn't be as difficult to sand around and just attach it later. My approach here is getting all the flat surfaces or those curved areas first, and then I'll come in and do the detail sanding because honestly, the detail sanding is my least favorite. So I am to the point where I basically just have this to sand to get this finish off. The wood is somewhat on the soft side and the finish is coming off quite easily. I just kind of rub that not like pretty quickly with a 220 grit even. But I want to start out a little bit more careful, and then I can always like up the aggressiveness with my sanding as I feel comfortable. So this is just a medium grit. It says it's like a 120 to 150. I would say it's more on the 150 side. This is one of their squishier foam pads, as like this one is, it's just harder. It's more dense. So I'm going to start with the squishy. If it doesn't work, I'll move to the dense. And then I also have like one of their attachments you can put on there that I could put my own sanding pads on there. So lots of options. I'm going to go through, see what works, and get all this off. So the squishy one ended up working pretty well. Again, I think that's partly because the finish was failing. So everything was coming off pretty easily. So for these areas where it had the more detailed trim, I used that squishy foam pad. And then at the bottom where the wood was harder, I used the foam pad that I could add my own sanding disc to. And then for all the crevices that were harder to get to, I mostly used the contour sanding block just to kind of get wherever I could, and then the other areas I maybe either hand sanded or you could use a Bondo scraper to get into those really tight corners. Basically do whatever you can. I also came in with this small scraper to get some of these areas that would be harder to sand, because the tricky part is that you need to be sanding with the grain. The easier thing to do would just have been go left to right sanding to get rid of that old finish, but that would have left marks in the wood that later would show up when I'm staining, and it just wouldn't look good. So I'm trying my best to get off what finish I can without just having to sand. I also used the scraper to get into some of the tight corners of the trim, and it worked really well. You do want to be careful that you do not gouge the wood with the scraper. That's always a risk, so I just tried to go as careful as I could. So this area here is just proving to be kind of challenging to sand because the wood of the actual base, not this extra trim, is a lot harder than the trim wood. So if I'm going at this kind of hard and getting it down, it's wanting to take away the details, like the curves and whatnot of the trim. So I'm going to try acetone. I've just put it in this little container here. I'm gonna use a brush and dip it in there and see if that is gonna work. Thankfully, it was quite effective in removing a lot of the finish. I still had to go in and sand some more, but it helps quite a bit. So I got a little nervous about sanding around these sides and this trim. Just with the, I didn't want to sand through the veneer, so I decided to just switch to using stripper. I'm using Smart Strip. It's their, what is it? Advanced paint remover. So I've used it before, and I like that it's safer and it is effective. It does have a longer work time, so this will need to be on here a couple hours, but I'll just cover it with some food plastic wrap and take care of some other things that I need to do, and then I'll come back to it. A few hours later, I peeled off the plastic and scraped it all off as much as I could, and then came in and cleaned it with Green Easy's cleaner. I really think that it helps a lot with getting off the last bit of stripper and even finish that's on there. I really like that cleaner. And I did those trim pieces as well that I'd taken off. To first sand them, I'm using a medium grit and the more dense foam pad. And this is at 20 times the speed, so you can see it still took a little bit of time, but it worked well. Now on the door front where I had not done any sanding prior to putting the stripper on there, I did come in and hand sand a majority of the front because the finish was a bit more stubborn still, and I wanted to have more control over where I was sanding so I didn't burn through the veneer. I have a couple spots here that I was just going to maybe fill with this stain and figured they'd blend in, but they're just kind of bugging me. So I'm going to use this Quickwood. It's an epoxy filler. You just cut what you need, mix it together, and put it in here, and you can sand it within an hour. When I'm adding the filler, I'm really trying to push it into all the little crevices that can be in the missing area. This way I'm making sure I'm filling it the best, and then I can come in and add a little bit more if I need to, so there's a little bit of overlap that I can sand back. While the filler was drying, I went ahead and started going through my grits of sanding on the body and drawers. I'm using 180 grit. You can see I'm being careful to not get the areas that I filled here. Usually when I'm waiting on something to cure or dry, I try to work on something else, or obviously I have a laundry list of things I can do inside as well. For all the drawer fronts, I opted to hand sand in 180 and then 220 just because I was having a little bit of trouble with my sander wanting to burn through the veneer, so this was safer, and honestly it really didn't take a whole lot of time and was pretty easy to do. For the trim, I just used my Surf Prep sander and the squishy foam pads to sand through the grits, and then of course had to hand sand in some areas as well. And then lastly, I chose to hand sand the areas that I had filled. Once I was finally finished with all that sanding, it's time to wipe it down. At first I gave it a vacuum, and then now I'm using a tack cloth to get up the dust. I still felt like it was pretty dusty, so then I followed that up with some mineral spirits. I would avoid mineral spirits if you're using a water-based stain, but since I plan to use an oil-based stain, it was a really good option for getting it cleaned up. So the mineral spirits are drying. Next up, I'm going to apply a pre-stain. It's oil-based because I'm using oil-based stain, so it's pretty easy. You just wipe it on with either a brush or a rag. I'm going to use a rag because I'm out of my chip brushes. So I'm going to get that on there. You wait 5 to 15 minutes, wipe back any excess, and then you can start applying stain. The can says that you want to apply the stain within 2 hours, which I'm planning to do tonight. So I'm hoping to get most of it on there before the sun's completely set, because light will be so much better. Well, just kidding. It congealed or something in there. I'm wondering if it got hot from the sun being on it. I don't know, like the air pressure kind of released when I opened it. So I will not be applying this, and I'll just be putting the stain on there. Hopefully it'll be fine, but because it's a gel stain, not too worried about it absorbing too bad, but we'll see. You notice how I keep making plans and they don't go as planned. So I thought I would skip the pre-stain, but I put it on one of the drawers, the stain on the drawers, and I was like, I don't know, this isn't wiping back quite as easily. So I ran to Lowe's and picked up some more, and here I am applying it. It's a rather easy process. Oh, and I also got a couple chip brushes while I was there. But basically, with as much time as it took me to get through all the drawers and then the body of the buffet, it was time to come back and wipe back the rest of it, and then I could stain. I am using Minwax's gel stain in the color coffee. This is the same color that I used on the bar cabinet that I did a couple videos ago. But what's kind of fun with it being different wood types, this comes out a lot darker. Honestly, how I had envisioned it coming out on the bar cabinet. But I guess it's just the difference of woods, and also the grain was pretty closed with that quarter sawn wood, so that's probably part of it as well. With gel stain, you have a few minutes to put it on and then wipe it back. So I'm putting a good covering on there so it's not drying out on me as I get the rest of it, and then I just start wiping it back. I felt like it took a bit more elbow grease to get the excess all off as I was wiping it back. I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe it was the wood type. If anybody has some insight into that, I would love to know. I'm always loving to learn so I can get better and be more knowledgeable. For the top that had such a large area to cover, I first did half of it before then moving on to the second half, and I made sure to overlap my stain in the middle. So there wouldn't be any streakiness. And since it was pretty dark, I then used a light to make sure I got everything off. I let the stain dry well overnight, and now I'm just taking a tack cloth to get any particles that may have fallen on it as it was drying. I don't want any of those being put in my top coat. To protect it, I'm using Minwax wipe-on poly. You could make your own. It's basically just half and half of a regular polyurethane and mineral spirits, but I like having it already made for me. So you just wipe it on, work in sections. You don't want to stay in one section for too long because as it starts to dry, you could make it kind of streaky or rough, but it works really well. For the sides, I like to pour it onto my rag that I'm using and then wipe it onto the surface. One of the things I really like about this wipe-on poly is just the warmth and depth it gives to the color, and then it has a nice satin sheen. This is how they look like after one coat, and I'll do 2 more. Now it is time to blend those areas that I repaired on the top. I'm using Mohawk's Blend All sticks. I am basically just layering the colors the best that I can to get it to match the top. I feel like these sticks are really nice crayons. I'm gonna color it on there and then you rub it in with your finger. I like to wear gloves just because, I don't really know what all's in there, and it's prefer not to get it on my skin. But it's just a matter of mixing and layering your colors to get them to match your stain. As you go along, you want to seal in those layers of color that you're doing. I'm using Mohawk's Vinyl Easy Spray. It's gonna kind of seal in what color you've done, and then you can keep layering on top as you go to get it to match the best. This takes some time and practice. I am still trying to get better at this, and I wish that also I had invested in, they have a marker that's like a really fine brush tip. So I attempted to do that with some furniture paint. It looked okay, but I think the brush marker would have worked better, and I have since ordered that. Now, some of the true magic can really happen with a toning spray. That's why I've taped this off, and I'm using a toner that I have. It's by Mohawk. It's a medium brown though, and I just don't think it worked out as well as I would have liked if I had had a darker color, but that's something else I plan to invest in as well. And then of course I needed to reattach the trim. I just used my brad nailer. It was pretty easy. Once that third coat of poly was dry, it was time to do the finishing touches. I cleaned up the hardware, but I forgot to record that. But you'll get to see that here soon. And then for the drawers, I am refreshing the drawer glides with this furniture wax, and I also do the inside and out of the drawers. Okay, now it's time to take a look back at where we started. This was such a beautiful piece. It just was beat up from over the years, had that damage on the top, the finish was failing, and it just needed some new life. So after many, many hours of work, here it is now. I love it. It truly is my favorite piece that I've done so far. I love how the hardware just provides a beautiful contrast to that dark stain. The grain just speaks for itself. It's so well made and is such a lovely statement piece for a home. If I had to make any critiques, there are some areas that I feel like the stain could have wiped away better, but overall, I absolutely love it. Of course, I always love your feedback and would love to know what you think about this one. Thank you so much for watching, and if you're not already subscribed, I would love for you to hit that subscribe button to follow along for my future projects, and I will catch you next time.